How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
Some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.
this the end? There's a noise inside my head of crying people facing death. Is this the end? Is this the end? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final time. What have we done to the world? What have we done to the world? I'm burning in the stone. There's no place to hide. I'm burning in the stone. This is the final
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeit einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist. Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein. Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, und ein Platz genossen ist, weil ich ein in die Arbeiter einweist und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Hi, Здравствуйте, comrades. For some reason, it didn't want to connect my camera at first. I was like, what is going on? Здравствуйте, comrades. You might notice that it is not Saturday. So you're like, why are we hearing the Socialism Saturday theme song? Well, you're hearing the Socialism Saturday theme song because today we are live a little bit early to do a very special live socialism experience. Because our friends, our dear friends, including Philip over at Red May, are concluding their month of socialism. Now, we started off the month stream sniping their very first stream and reacting to it. And in the chat, Philip said that I was a troll, even though I was asking questions that were completely relevant to the presentation. And Philip said that I had an army of secret agents that were in the chat. And so, we haven't really been bothering Philip during the month of May. We've watched some of the Red May content, and I think I really have to give it to Philip. This year's Red May is far ahead of last year's Red May. So I don't know what happened between last year and this year, but it feels like Philip has gotten his mojo back. He's delivered us some great content this month, and I just would be remiss if I allowed the month of May to conclude without us sniping Philip's, what I think is the final presentation of Red May, the final live presentation of Red May. And that presentation is going to start at 5 p.m. So that's why I had to go live a little bit early today. It's simply a logistical issue in that in about 14 minutes, we are going to watch live as a group of revolutionary socialists out in Seattle talk about the anti-work movement. There's this presentation called Fake Work, How I Began to Suspect That Capitalism Was a Joke. We have watched Sarah Jaffe on more than one occasion on the channel. Sarah Jaffe has written a whole book about the anti-work movement. But really, this seems to be just a lot of socialists complaining. Intrepid explorer Lee Claire de la Berge leads us on an expedition into the darkest heart of the prestigious management consulting firm that employed her straight out of college. Let's call it the inane heart, as she found herself among a carousel of characters plucked from a Mike Judge screenplay. Now, listen, I have some familiarity with management consulting. I have no doubt that this person experienced an absolute shit show, and I'm actually looking forward to hearing about it. Joining her on this expedition to extract theoretical nuggets from the nature of financialized capitalism are Madeline, Jason, and Sarah. And so we are going to be watching the final episode of Red May, and we are going to be bidding our friend, our comrade Philip adieu until next year. And so that's what we're going to be doing today, guys. That does start in about 13 minutes. Now, since we have some extra time, I have a bone to pick with someone in my community. And he's not here right now. But I have no doubt that if I pick my bone with him publicly, a video of this will make its way to him eventually. And the person I have a bone to pick with is Stony Baloney. Now, Stony Baloney goes by Master Shake in the community. He goes by social media comment section sometimes in the community. He recently changed his handle to Master Shake. He likes to switch things up. But you can see this is Stony Baloney. This is Twitter feed. Now listen. I'm not going to get into the business of telling people what they can and cannot say on the internet. You guys can say and do whatever you want. I don't care. When I do care is when I see people who know better using information that we've sourced in this community to, lie and mislead people about what's actually going on. And I have a great deal of respect for Stony Baloney. I really do. Stony Baloney is an asset to this community. I really hope that this is the last time I will ever have a bone to pick with him. I really, really do. I want him to stick around. I want him to contribute. I like him. I like him. He's a good guy. He's smart. And I got to give Stony Baloney a lot of credit too, because he watches stuff oftentimes before we ever get to it. He has informed us of so many things. He's driven us right to the literature. He's the one that came up with the idea of gain of function Marxism that, I kind of took. He has had so many ideas, and I will always give him full credit for this. I don't think he's a bad person. I don't think any of that. I think he's a good person. I think he's a smart person. I think he knows what's up is the thing. And because he knows what's up, I'm just really, really confused. And I would like an explanation for what I saw happen today, because I know that like, this is a genuine thing. I'm actually not being a dick. I know that he knows better than what happened today. And I don't know if this was his intention, but let me show you explicitly what happened today. So, Jack Posobiec, because Jack Posobiec likes to take the line of, they hate white people, they hate white people, they hate white people, they hate white people are victims, white people are victims, white people are victims, white people are victims, ba 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 ba. That's like one of Jack Posobiec's key talking points. It's one of the reasons I do not pay attention to him at all, because I don't think he's an intellectually honest person. I think he is a massive fuck off grifter who will say and do whatever he needs to in order to remain relevant and chase clout on the internet. I also think he's a naval intelligence officer that is, well, probably still has many connections in naval intelligence, which means he's a fucking Fed, which means I don't trust a single thing that Jack Posobiec says or does. I don't think it comes from a genuine place. I think he is a highly connected person that his job is to shill a narrative. And there's a reason that he says and does everything he did. I do not believe there's a genuine bone in this guy's body. It pains me when I see people like Joshua Lissick working with Jack Posobiec, although I totally know why Joshua Lissick is working with Jack Posobiec. Joshua Lissick, I actually think understands the left. He's the guy that actually wrote the Unhumans book. He's the quote-unquote ghostwriter that actually wrote the Unhumans book that Jack Posobiec put his name on to get it out there. And again, I understand why I'm not shitting on Joshua Lissick at all. I just think Joshua Lissick is actually smart, and I think Jack Posobiec is actually a grifter that I don't trust at all and never will. But I wasn't remotely surprised to see Jack Posobiec talking about the messages of the DC shooter, which apparently called to kill white people. Now, am I surprised that the messages of the DC shooter called to kill white people? And yes, in this case, I actually do think the DC shooter means white people. I do. You want to know why? Because that's a he committed murder as a political act. This is a deranged, unhinged person. Okay. So do I have any problem believing that a deranged, unhinged person has deranged, unhinged ideas? No, I don't at all. I don't. And I don't think that that is a reflection of what the left actually thinks, because we never see the left talking like this. We see deranged, unhinged maniacs talking like this. We don't see the left talking like this with any sort of consistency or regularity. So it's not evidence to me that you're saying that a person who shot 2 people in cold blood wanted to kill all white people. That's not evidence of what the general far left actually believes, because whether you like it or not, most far leftists are not actually going to go out and commit what I think he was trying to commit an act of revolutionary suicide. And he's probably going to get the death penalty for it, so he will, but it's going to be a prolonged bout of revolutionary suicide. Anyway, this is not my point. I completely expect Jack Posobiec to shill the bullshit. They want to kill all white people. We're all the victims of the world. White men are the poor, obsessed minority of the world. Cry for us. Be sorry for us. Feel bad for us. We are the victims. White men are the I completely expect Jack Posobiec to shill this bullshit narrative. What I don't expect is to see Stony Baloney in his replies using a clip from the Party of Socialism and Liberation, in which the former presidential candidate for the Party of Socialism and Liberation was talking about capitalism, but said white supremacy, and using that clip to present it as some sort of evidence that they hate white people, when that is not what Claudia Dela Cruz was talking about in this presentation, Stony Baloney, and I damn well think you know that. Let's just listen to this clip really quick. We have some extra time. Let's just listen to this really quick so you guys can hear.
And for us as socialists, we're really clear that the only way to abolish prisons and the only way to abolish policing is abolishing capitalism. Like, there's no other way around it. People have been fighting for reforms for a long time. You know, if we think about the Attica uprisings, we think about George Jackson and the many things that came after that, the hunger strikes. Like, there is no intent from the capitalist class to abolish what is an instrument to protect them. And so it's one of the instruments, one of the institutions that once socialism wins, needs to be reorganized to have Biden in there, Blinken in there. I'm not joking. I'm not even joking. Like, we've been in spaces with abolitionists who have said things like, well, we don't believe in prisons. So what are you gonna do with the white supremacists that are actually parading around, terrorizing communities? What are you gonna do with them? You're gonna allow them to continue to terrorize communities? Or are you gonna put, I don't know, like, you're gonna put them in house arrest? Like, what are you gonna do? Like, it needs to be able to serve the purpose to defend the majority of the people, which.
Now, if you've watched my content for any period of time at all, you know that when she said white supremacist, she didn't actually mean people with white skin color. She meant the capitalist class, the owner class, the bourgeois class. That is what she meant. We know that because she said capitalism like half a dozen times leading up to that. There was no mention of white skin color in that clip at all. And yet Stony Baloney is here responding to Jack Posobiec, who's talking about they just hate white people. It's anti-white hatred. Baby.
And for us as socialists,
hang on. Shut up, Claudia. Stony Baloney comes in. The idea of imprisoning white people comes directly from the Party of Socialism and Liberation's presidential candidate, Stony Baloney. Fuck you. With love and respect, because I do appreciate what you contribute to the community, but you know that line isn't true. You know that's not what she was saying. Your own clip shows that's not what she was saying. She was saying capitalism, 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 white supremacy. When she says white supremacy, she means systemic racism or the system that upholds racism. That means capitalism. There was not a single reference to white people in that entire fucking clip. So why are we pretending that there was? To kiss the ass of Jack Posobiec. Again, I'm not going to tell people what to say or do on the internet. You can say and do whatever you want to on the internet, but if you're using clips that are sourced from stuff we've watched in this community, because I watched this on Socialism Saturday on July 20th. We were actually supposed to watch this the day it happened. This speech, which was in Milwaukee, happened to take place on the day Trump got shot. So our Socialism Saturday, when we ended up covering when Trump got shot, we were supposed to cover this talk live, and then we ended up covering if Trump got shot instead. Or maybe it wasn't live. It was like a couple hours after it happened. But then we ended up covering it the following week. This talk, I'm pretty sure, maybe Stony Baloney watched it on his own. He does do that sometimes. But this came from Socialism Saturday, and it is extremely clear what she was saying. This was a thorough breakdown that Reagan did on this if you want more information about it. So I'm a little confused about why I'm seeing this in Jack Posobiec's replies, that this is about imprisoning white people, because he knows it's not. He knows it's not. And then Stony Baloney just posted it directly on his Twitter feed saying exactly the same fucking thing. The idea of imprisoning white people comes directly from the Party of Socialism and Liberation. And guess who retweeted it? Because this is really what Stony Baloney was after the entire time. Let's just go to post engagements. Who retweeted it? Oh, wait. Jack Posobiec and all of Jack Posobiec, Joshua Lissick too. And all of their know-nothing fucking minions who have no clue what they're talking about. And if I go into the replies on this, he's shilling this clip out and we're saying it's about white people. It's about white people. If I go into the replies on this, I said, I'm perplexed why you're allowing people to believe this has anything to do with white skin color when you know that's not what she's talking about. Whiteness means capitalism. Instantly, one of Jack Posobiec's retarded followers, oh, you guys can't see what I'm doing. Instantly, one of Jack Posobiec's retarded followers says, I find retards. And if you look at the other replies on this, and there are a lot of people from my community replying to him because seriously, what the fuck are you doing? Why does she have yellow hair and black roots? She's ignorant. Oh my God. There are some people who think Stony Baloney is a socialist because they're stupid, because that is the level of person that Jack Posobiec appeals to. He appeals to the lowest common denominator. We're better than that. I'm really disappointed in this. I like Stony Baloney a lot. I think he's very smart. And I think he's smart enough to know better. And I'm not happy about that. But, you know, mistakes were made, and hopefully those mistakes aren't made again, because now literally tens of thousands of people have been misinformed based off of that one tweet. Tens of thousands of people have been lied to based off that one tweet. Tens of thousands of people now have a much different idea of what the left means than is the actual truth. Guys, it doesn't help to lie to people. Just because I know you guys want to get like social media clout and you want to get retweets and you want to feel like you're known by the influencers are going to discard you as soon as you stop saying what they want you to say, by the way. You might think you're making... Look, I posted this tweet where she said capitalism. No one's fucking listening to the video. They're looking at your words and you're saying they want to put white people in prison. That's not what she was saying in the video. At all. In any way. And if this was the average conservative retard, I would understand why they got that wrong, because the average conservative retard doesn't have a high enough IQ to know what's going on. Stony Baloney is not a retard. Stony Baloney is not average. Stony Baloney knows what the fuck is going on, and he still lied to people for no fucking reason. And so I really hope that there's some explanation for this that I'm not seeing, because I'm a little disappointed. I'm a little disappointed. What are we doing? If our job isn't to... And listen, I know that most people don't take this as seriously as I do. But if we are not correctly informing people of what's going on, then what are we doing? What is the point of any of this? Is it just to fuck around and get likes and retweets on the internet? If it's just to fuck around and get likes and retweets on the internet, I can completely change my content strategy over to conservative clickbait, and I would have way more viewers. I would have a way bigger audience. I would make way more money than I'm making now. Maybe I should do that. If the goal is just to get retweets at all costs and to suck the dick of Jack Posobiec, then maybe I should just make all my content conservative clickbait and see if people still like it. I don't know. I think we would have a much lower IQ audience. I think we'd attract the lowest form of human being on the internet. I think that most of the smart people would run away screaming, because sadly, there are many more stupid people on the internet than there are smart people. That's just the way it goes. That's true in life in general. Like, there are just way many more stupid people. And so if you make content that appeals to stupid people, like it will attract stupid people. I would prefer not to make content that appeals to stupid people. But when I see people in my community that know better going for the low-hanging fruit, I'm kind of like, man, if the smart people don't get it, then is there any hope? I don't know. Anyway, I like Stony Baloney a lot. I don't want to make an enemy of him. I would love for him to be a member of our community in good standing and participate in good standing. I'm just very confused about what I saw today on Twitter. That's all. That's all. Anyway, we are waiting for Red May to get started. We are waiting. We are waiting. They will get started shortly, it seems. They have put it slow mode on just for us, I bet you. Why can't I? Oh, there it is. Okay. And this is a live presentation, guys. This is live. We are going to keep the chat up so we can watch the chat. Who knows what's going to happen in the chat? Uh-oh. Did it just start? Philip! It started! It started and it didn't reload on my other browser.
Before we go into that, I want to clue you in as to what we have going for our last 3 days of Red May tomorrow. And these are all live events coming up. If you're in Seattle, check us out. Tomorrow night at
There's me in
7:30
the
p.m.
chat.
will be a town hall with Whatever Happened to Revolution with Jasper Burns, Nikhil Pal Singh, Colleen Lai, and Idris Robinson. Friday night from 5 to 7.
Philip has
we'll
upgraded
be
his
at
background.
Vermilion Bar, a kind of round-robin conversational event called What Just Happened, America?
Me too.
And that will be everybody who is here. Everybody will talk. No one will be the featured speakers. And then on Saturday at Elipe Books, from 12:30 to 3, we have 2 events. The first event is a conversation between Nikhil Singh and Jamie Merchant, the author of Endgame. We'll be launching that book, which some of you may have read in the Brooklyn Rail in the field notes section. If you haven't, you should check field notes every time. Really, almost the best writing you will find about the economy and the political economy and so forth. And then at 2 o'clock, we will have Jasper Burns talking about his book, The Future Revolution, with Idris Robinson. So check us out tomorrow, and also check out our website, www.redmayseattle.org. We do not have any grants. We are entirely funded by contributions from you. So if you have any loose change, donate to us. You can click on donate, and you have 2 options. Our Patreon, you can become a patron, or you can do our GoFundMe. So now, without further ado, let's look at fake work. We have a great panel today, and I'd like to introduce them. On the panel, we have Jason Reed, professor of philosophy at the University of Southern Maine, author of The Double Shift, Spinoza and Marx on the Politics of Work, and many other wonderful books. Madeline Lane McKinney is a feminist writer. She's based in Portland. She's the author of Comedy Against Work. And then we have Lee Claire LaBerge, who is the author of Marx for Cats and the new book, Fake Work, How I Learned that Capitalism Was Joke. I've got a little, could you correct the title exactly? How I Began to Suspect that Capitalism is a Joke. So there's a little sort of mystery over time as it reveals itself to be a joke rather than in one moment. And of course, our moderator, Sarah Jaffe, who is based in New Orleans and is in the midst of a thunderstorm. She's the author of the wonderful book, Work Won't Love You Back, and the new one, From the Ashes, Grief and Revolution, Revolution from the, give it to me, From the Ashes, what is it?
Grief and Revolution in a World on Fire.
Grief and Revolution in a World on Fire.
She looks older than the last time I saw her.
So take it away, Sarah.
Probably still a cat lady.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sarah.
I'm back at Red May, which I love. And I'm here with 3 people whose work I've long admired. And I don't think I've spoken to any of them directly before. So this is going to be fun. I'm excited about it. Mostly, I'm excited to talk about how capitalism is a joke and work is fake, which are things that I have long believed. But this book gave me an insight into something that, like, I'm not going to lie, I read your whole book and I still don't really know what management consultants do. And I've been wondering for a long time. So we're going to get into that and explain how
that is usually ignored.
Not much, but also fly around the world. So yeah, Lee Claire, will you start us off and tell us a little bit about your book and what motivated you to write it and whatever else you want to share with people?
Great. Yes, I will. And thank you. And I just want to say, I want to thank Red May and Philip for organizing. But also, I couldn't imagine 3 people who I'd rather be in conversation with about what does it mean to work? What does it mean to labor? Why do we do it? And how and for whom? And this book is a different book than other books that I've written. I've mostly written in an academic tone, academic genre. I've published books with university presses. Fake Work is coming out, either it's already out or it's coming out very soon, from Haymarket Press. And it's really a book about how I got interested in a topic that has been with me since my early 20s, which is what is the economy? How do we intersect it? How do we
What
make
is the
meaning
economy?
from it? How does it make meaning of us? And I did my PhD at NYU in American Studies. And when I started my doctoral research in 2003, 2004, 2005, I was very interested in something that critics then were calling the financialization of the economy, which would be sort of, a displacement of production and productive labor in favor of what we might think of as a service economy, finance, insurance, real estate. And now that seems sort of secondhand to critics of capitalism. But in 2004, 2005, when I was starting to write my dissertation about the
Critics of
financialization of the American
capitalism,
economy
like
and the kind of
socialists?
cultures that it engendered, people would ask, how would you get interested in finance? Like these, you have American Psycho, and that's the sort of 1980s send up of finance. But there wasn't a lot more than finance as sort of like a bad form of like masculinity and heterosexuality in the 1980s. And when I would answer with, well, I worked for this fake management consulting company that was the bookkeeper for Enron, which was in that moment, sort of falling apart in one of the most disastrous ways possible. And I would tell them, I can't figure out, like, if that is what capitalism is, if that is the apotheosis of capitalism, of a certain kind of, advanced democratic capitalism of the global north, then I don't know what's next. Like, I don't know how to critique that. I don't know how to make sense of that. And that was already with a few years of graduate school under my belt. But when I had the experiences that I write about in the book, I was only 22. I had just graduated from Hampshire College. And I graduated in 1998. So it was really the height of the dot-com bubble. We had about 2 more years of this very fast and loose money flowing through, California and New York. And I left college thinking I want to be a businessman. Like, that's what I want to do with my life. Like,
Bullshit.
I'm ready, like, let
No,
me
you
sell
didn't.
out. Never occurred to me that someone would have to buy what I had to sell, but,
Exactly.
sign me up, So I moved to New York hoping to get a job at a .com. I couldn't get a job there. But I did, through sort of happenstance, get a job working alongside Arthur Andersen, which people may have heard of Andersen Consulting. I think it's now just called Accenture. They went bankrupt and had to reconvene and this and that. But I got a job working alongside them, doing a global audit of one of the world's largest advertising companies to prepare for Y2K. And for people who are younger than me, I'm not sure how Y2K circulates as an imaginary for people in their 20s. I mean, I know there was just that movie about it. But throughout the late 90s, there was an actual belief that computerized technology could ground to a halt on December 31st, or I guess January 1st at 12 a.m. of the new millennium. And when it did, everything would stop. I mean, we could just have complete and total chaos, social disruption. I mean, name your Armageddon scenario, it might happen. So management consulting companies advertised to various Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 clients, hire us, let us put in place a kind of anti-Y2K prophylactic. So if the worst does come and you get sued, you will be able to go to court and say, look, we did everything possible. We are not liable for this. This is a sort of act of God disaster. So I found myself on one of those teams. I found myself working alongside these consultants in what's called quality assurance, which if you've ever called an 800 number and you hear the operator say this call may be monitored for quality assurance, what that means is that somebody is going to be listening or reading the transcripts of these calls. But what quality assurance also means is, or what I came to realize is, you know, these corporations really produce a huge amount of documentation. And they do that so if they were to get sued, they would have an archive with which to defend themselves. And they know that the other corporations who might sue them are also doing that. So everyone is trying to produce as much documentation as possible for fear that somebody might get sued or that they might need to sue somebody else. So it's this very, you know, phantasmatic sort of sphere of potential litigation. And that goes on all the time. But with a world-ending scenario on the horizon, there seemed to be even more reason to prepare one's company for a sort of onslaught of chaos. So that said, I got hired. I spent most of my time editing and photocopying spreadsheets. And I then, in even a more surreal moment, got promoted to a media director position, which meant that I was deputized with visiting advertising agencies all over the world to ask them if they had done their homework to prepare for Y2K. What I learned is that Y2K was only really an American phenomenon. Nobody else was doing anything. So this company would just send people all over the world flying around for these 20 and 30-minute check-ins. And then we would call it a day. And, you know, while I was there, I was so, I mean, on the one hand, dumbstruck, but on the other hand, in total awe that this is how a large conglomerate works, that I began keeping notes about it.
It's actually very true.
Recording
everything she's saying is true.
Documenting. So my job was to check documentation. I began keeping my own documentation. And at a certain point, what I realized is I have no desire to work for a corporation. I have no desire to be a management consultant. What I'm interested in is writing about the economy. So by the time I left that position in 2001, by the time I left the position in 2000, I had this manuscript, which was a document of these surreal 18 months I spent as what I call a fake, you know, it was like a fake job for a fake crisis at a company that ended up itself sort of being fake. And I thought that would be my dissertation. I went to graduate school thinking I'm going to do a sort of ethnography of global corporate labor. That didn't happen. And one of the things that, you know, I'd be interested to discuss if the panelists are interested is the writing process and what does it mean to go back to an old voice and what does it mean to, you know, produce your own archive in a certain way. So that didn't happen. I didn't do anything with this book that I wrote while I was there. And it sort of hung over my head for about 20 years. Always thinking like, wow, this is a great archive about work. I should do something with it. But I lost the voice of the 22-year-old, you know, very self-assured businessman that I had once been. And I didn't know how to recapture it. And then a few years ago, thanks to a grant and thanks to some time away from teaching, what I realized is I could tell this story now, this story of how I got interested in the economy and how I became somebody who, you know, really has devoted much of her professional life to thinking about, you know, what is labor, what is finance, what is money, what is value. But I could tell it as a sort of conversion story of how, sort of against all of my best instincts, which were pretty bad because they were essentially to be, you know, I wanted to become a capitalist. I wanted to become a consultant. Trying to do that turned me into a Marxist, right? Like seeing what goes on in the surreal corporate trenches sort of revealed to me that I didn't have the basis to ask and answer the kind of questions that I found so interesting. And those are questions that I think really need to come out of a certain level of thinking abstractly about what capitalism is and what it does and for whom. I also find it interesting that I didn't have that basis from my liberal arts degree. So in my mind, this is also a book about like the liberal arts and what the liberal arts is and what it does. But the book Fake Work ended up being a retelling of me trying to write the book and not being able to write the book while having the experience as a 22, 23, 24-year-old who sort of realizes what she can and cannot do with her critical apparatus, and who desires a different one, and who ultimately does go out and get that, you know, in the form of, I think, Marxist criticism and critical theory, which really have been such animating forces for my creative and critical life. At the same time, this was a really fun book to write after I got over like the 20 years of alienation that it produced in me, because it's so nice to actually see a different voice that I once had and be able to treat it archivally. So the book Fake Work quotes from the book that I wrote as a 22-year-old management consultant. And that book had the very sort of surreal and boastful title of just Bildungsroman, which would be the coming of age, you know, but one comes into a corporation. That's how one comes of age in 1999 in New York City. So the book is archival, but the archive is my own. The book is quite narrative. It sort of uses a narrative structure that I played with a little bit in my book, Marx for Cats, and that I think offers slightly different things than a more monograph structure and academic structure does. One of my real hopes for the book is that people who do not have a background in critical theory, I mean, or sort of had the background I had as a 22 or 23-year-old, can pick up the book and sort of start thinking about, yeah, what are these jobs? Like, what is a service industry? What is a fire economy? What do they do? And for whom do they do it? And then also, of course, think about the structure of the intellectual division of labor in our society at the moment. Although I think it's changing. I mean, that's maybe one thing we can talk about. But you know, management consulting, like it used to be, I'm genuinely not sure it still is, but it used to be, it was for the best and the brightest, you know, and they recruited at the best schools and they paid the most money. And they consider themselves to be sort of intellectuals of the corporate world. Pete Buttigieg was a management consultant, people might remember. So this book is also about, how do we come into our intellectual own? How do we find our intellectual own? And how is intellectual labor and identity distributed in a corporatized society such as ours? So I'm not going to say too much more about the book. I want to hear what other people think. And I'm, you know, really open to talking about anything, any part of the book, or any part of the writing process, or any part of the process of rewriting. So much writing is always already a rewriting. So with that, I will turn it back to Sarah.
Yeah, I definitely do want to come back to the question of writing and going back to the sort of archive of oneself, because I also did that in a very different way recently. But yeah, so I'm just going to tell a funny story before I hand this over to, I'm still picking who's going to go next. I went to a liberal arts school too. I actually went to school here in New Orleans. I started out at Tulane, which I still don't think management consultants are recruited from, but might have been more likely than. I hated Tulane. I just transferred to Loyola New Orleans, stayed here. Well, I left here for 20 odd years and then moved back. But years later, I was in New York and I was a journalist, and I was invited to come speak at like Yale Progressive Student Conference, something, which, like, because it's Yale, there's like astronomical amounts of money sloshing around. So basically they paid to bring in a bunch of speakers, and there were like as many people in the room listening to the talks as there were on the panel. And they asked me to be on two panels. One was about labor, which was obvious. It was 2011. I was talking about the Wisconsin uprising with the political director at the time of the AFL-CIO, because it was Yale. And the other one was about, like, how do we convince our classmates not to go into finance? And this was where I learned that the reason everybody from Yale goes into either finance or management consulting or Teach for America is that all of those things come in with like a test you have to pass and a recruiter and whatever, and you never have to go out in the world and, like, as we like to say, get a real job. Of course, I had been waiting tables all this time, and no one certainly tried to recruit me into finance. But it was this fascinating world, because the one of the two people who came to this panel was this girl that was a Middle East studies major who was wearing a keffiyeh, mind you, this is again 2011. And she's getting recruited by, whatever, Accenture, I guess. And I found this so fascinating, because this is a world I had no idea even existed. So for the rest of us people in the world who have had real jobs, like what is a service industry, it's me carrying a tray of drinks to somebody. It's really fascinating. So I found the book a lot of fun. I think on this note, I want to go to Jason next.
All right, thank you. So glad to be here. So start with the beginning that Lee, Claire, and I had a somewhat similar trajectory. We both graduated from Hampshire College. We both studied,
It's a male feminist.
Primarily as post-structuralist thinkers there.
That
And we
makes
both
sense.
developed an interest in Marx afterwards in graduate school. I wish I could say that my post-college work had something to do with that interest, but I only worked in the mailroom of a law firm in San Francisco for one summer before going straight from undergrad to grad school, which is to say I had a lot to learn from reading fake work. And so the book can be considered, the first way I approach it is thinking about it as a contribution to workers' inquiry.
None of these people have had real
those of you that
jobs
don't
outside
know,
of
the traditional
academia.
workers' inquiry can be traced back to a questionnaire that
makes
Marx
sense.
sent out in 1880, asking about like 100+ questions about working conditions, how many hours, how many children are there, etc. And Marx got supposedly very few responses, but that has not kept the traditional workers' inquiry from continuing in various forms throughout the Marxist tradition. And there are multiple interpretations and traditions of how to do this and what it means. I mean, some have followed Marx's method, in which a questionnaire or a brief interview with workers is enough, while others have taken the sort of Maoist maxim, no investigation, no right to speak, in a much more transformative way. The inquiry becomes a task to go into a factory or a call center to learn firsthand about work, becomes a kind of ethnography. There's also a disagreement about what the inquiry is meant to do. For some, it's a matter of gathering information that can be filtered up to the party or something and then become part of a strategy. While for others, in some sense, the inquiry itself is much more directly and immediately political. Thinking about work, talking about work is already beginning to change how one relates to work. And
Scott, when I say
organizing
real
to some
jobs,
extent.
I mean not in academia.
But what is
He has a
often
real job.
overlooked
It's in
in this long
academia.
tradition of
They
debate and
all work in
discussion
academia
is
and
that
or
most
media.
of us do not enter the workplace as a matter of choice at all, whether or not to conduct an inquiry. We need to work in order to survive. And
You don't work as a college
very
professor to
interesting that Lee
survive.
Claire's book, she did not take this job because she wanted to know what it was like to work, but she had that interest, or to organize workers, but because she needed a job. And I do think that there's something about, and maybe we can talk about this, about the necessity underlying the job here that makes this book different from other kind of voluntary workers' inquiries, because I think it's that necessity that forces
Voluntary
us to adapt
workers?
to given working conditions and to adopt new ways of living and thinking for work. And that's one of the things that I feel like is sometimes overlooked in some workers' inquiries, not all. And Lee Clare's book is very much about a transformation in its own way. It is a Bildungsroman, even if it's not the Bildungsroman that she tells us about. The latter being, as she mentioned, the title of the book that she tried to write over 25 years ago when she first started working. This book is not really I didn't read it as so much a rewriting of that book, but a testament to that book's impossibility and the sort of transformation that happens. But what I found really interesting is that fake work is not just about Lee Clare's own transformation, but with it the limitations of different ways of knowing that compel and demand that transformation. And what I found very interesting is the fact that throughout the book, Lee Clare sort of talks about how she first made sense of work through the lenses of a kind of post-structuralism. Guided by the Derridian maxim that there's nothing outside the text.
Please don't do this.
She kind of uses that to interpret a different mantra, Arthur Andersen's mantra for dealing with Y2K, that Y2K is...
Guys, the reason we don't shitpost in their chat is I want the opportunity to ask them questions later, and if we shitpost in their chat, they're not going to take our questions later, okay? So just, we bide our time, we wait for the right questions to ask, we ask those questions that are relevant and that are also nuanced. We don't shitpost, okay?
And so, Derrida's "there's nothing outside the text" takes on a very different meaning in corporate America, where there's nothing outside the paper trail. What matters is not as done, what issues are addressed, but the process, that everything is documented and appears to be done. And of course, this is put forward by Arthur Andersen, gives it a particular irony reading it now. As we know, the real crisis of the early 2000s was not Y2K, but was in some sense brought about by the gap, not between the actual date and the 2-digit date on computers, but the gap between Enron's value on paper and its actual value or lack thereof, a scandal in which Arthur Andersen played a formative role. But focusing on the performative nature of texts, as Lee Clare reflects in the book, and the way they create their own reality, can get you pretty far, but only so far. And as Lee Clare documents, she finds herself drawn to Marx, compelled to understand not just the performative nature of text, but the hidden abode of production. But this search for the hidden abode comes up against the limit of contemporary capitalism, in which circulation displaces production. What this looked like at work, as Lee Clare documents, is this focus on keeping things moving with little concern with results. Questions are sent out but never returned. Trips are taken to conduct meetings that could have been an email. As Lee Clare writes, quote, "I was appalled at what I consider the sheer wastefulness of the entire enterprise, with no realization of the fact that at this level of corporate composition, money cannot be lost, only spent, because circulation itself is part of the point." As much as Lee Clare documents her transition from post-structuralist theories of text to Marx's understanding of production, she's confronted by a type of capitalism embodied by consultants and other forms of work at the upper echelons of capital, where capital is not so much about the circulation, where capital is as much about the circulation of particular kinds of text than it is the production of things. So the second thing I want to talk about is where this book sort of sits with other critiques of work or discussions of work. And it's hard not to compare or think about, at least for me, Lee Clare's fake work with David Graeber's influential text on bullshit jobs. And in some sense, Graeber's documentation or his theory of different types of bullshit jobs included what he referred to as box tickers, who exist more to produce the appearance of addressing an issue than actually addressing it. And in some sense, the entire Y2K process, as Lee Clare documents, it was all about checking a box or creating enough paper trail to say that one checked a box. But beyond that specific connection, Graeber gives the following definition, and I'll read it if people aren't familiar with it, of what a bullshit job is. Quote, "A bullshit job is a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee cannot justify its existence, even though as part of the conditions of employment, the employee feels obliged to pretend that is not the case." So Graeber focuses on the subjective dimension of bullshit jobs. The employee thinks it is bullshit. And he does this in part because if he didn't, any list of bullshit jobs would include, as he talks about, just a list of every job someone thinks is pointless. So like many people think a philosophy professor is pointless. I would be on their list of bullshit jobs because they don't care for it. Or, as Graeber says, if you're not interested in bowling, running a bowling alley seems like a bullshit job. But and Graeber's book is filled with documentation of people who, share with him how their job is bullshit. But it doesn't really address the, I think, more important question: what if people don't know their job is pointless? And in Lee Clare's book, she documents her own shifting understanding of her work and her own attempt to sort of make sense of that, shifting from sort of post-structural background to Marxist background. But throughout reading her book, it's not clear that any of her workers have the same search or questions. It seems that many respond to such fake work by trying to be in on the joke or get the best fake work they can find and make the system work as much as it can for them. Like there's a lot of discussion of people using those frequent flyer miles and what you can get from them. And so it paints a picture in which, Marx workers with nothing to lose but their chains have been replaced by workers who fear losing their frequent flyer miles or other status points. And so the big question I have is really, what would it take to radicalize other fake workers? What would it take to get them to try and change their understanding and to leave the world of corporate hotels and flight lounges to do something different? So, thank you.
Yeah, those are great points. So one of the points you made there, Jason, is a point that I've often made in discussions, including one at Red May a few years ago on workers' inquiry, because I'm a journalist. I'm a labor journalist. That means I talk to people about their work. Once upon a time in the early days of the Fight for 15, an editor tried to convince me to go get a job at a McDonald's and write about it, Barbara Ehrenreich style. And look, I love Barbara Ehrenreich, but I was bothered by this. And I was bothered by this because for a while, those were my jobs. And they were my jobs that I had to do to pay the bills. I never worked at a McDonald's, but I worked in a lot of restaurants, some better than others. I lived on tips, and so it bothered me, the idea that, and it still bothers me in a certain type of quote unquote workers' inquiry, that what we needed was a white person with a middle-class education to go into that job to be able to explain it to the rest of the world. The workers in McDonald's are perfectly capable of explaining their own conditions and figuring out that their job is bullshit. And in fact, starting a, nationwide and worldwide organizing campaign about it. And so this is what I think is so interesting about Lee Clare's book, again, is it's the story of how you figured out on the job that the job was bullshit. And sadly, you did not unionize Arthur Anderson. I'm really disappointed in you. But it's people will ask me how I got to being the kind of person that I did. And it was also, I would joke punk rock and shitty jobs, but like, it's that same experience, right? Of that realization that the job is bullshit. And I want to go back to the question of Jennifer later, but so now I want to hand this off to Madeline.
So unions are the answer to a job
these are such
you don't
interesting
like?
questions to loop back to. So thank you, Jason. And Madeline, on to you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much for writing this book, Lee Clare. I really enjoyed it and hope there's an audiobook because I think it would make a really good audiobook too. It's very funny. But I had a couple of points that I really wanted to focus on, although now I just want to talk about Jennifer. But the first is just, let's see. I was thinking a lot about this. The first time I encountered your work was with your 2014 book, Scandals and Abstractions. And I was, while this is a retelling of Bildungsroman, the project that couldn't be, I was also thinking a lot about it as a kind of sequel to that book, particularly concerning periodization. So between these books, you're posing a lot of really fascinating questions about periodizations, how we think of time and history, how we understand ourselves as historical subjects. And in Scandals and Abstractions, you're offering this periodization of the long 80s. That was really helpful to me.
Just so people know, I'm really having to restrain myself in the chat from asking something like, are you suggesting that unionization and completely changing the nature of your workplace is the answer to a job you don't like? Why can't you just go get another job? Are you saying that all jobs are bullshit just because you had a job right out of college that you don't like? You don't think other people have jobs out of college that they don't like? You don't think that's part of just learning how to exist? Like, I'm having to really restrain myself right now. So if other people are having problems restraining themselves, you are not alone, but we're being responsible and we're waiting for the right opportunity to ask a question.
Washington Post economist thing that's often, but it was a time that didn't happen, right? So I'm curious about the kind of conversation between these book projects and their historical narratives, and how these periodizations became legible at these different historical moments. And I'm, at least from what I understand, the long 80s really emerged from the post-financial crisis years, or that time. And now with this much more recent account of Y2K, I'm also really curious about 90s nostalgia, which I've been thinking a lot about as something that happens, kind of starts to rise through the 2010s, but at least my sense of it is like it reached its peak during COVID, early COVID, I would say. Like, COVID is obviously still going on, but that it was a kind of feature of 2020 sheltering in place in some ways. And I think you rightly point out that Y2K is much forgotten, but it's also reemerged as this aesthetic in youth culture. And I was recently, this is a little bit of a side note, but I was recently explaining to a couple of 13-year-olds what Y2K really was, because for them, it's like a way of dressing. There was that movie, but it's a way of dressing. It's a vibe, right? It's an aesthetic of their generation. And they were shocked that like, that's where this term came from, right? It was this incident. So I'm interested in hearing you talk more about what you think the prescience of Y2K is. Why, maybe there's some kind of analogy to be drawn between that moment in 2020 and what was happening, like the kind of weird elasticities of time that we were experiencing in 2020 and Y2K. The other thing, it's not going to be a surprise, I really want to hear you talk about comedy. So I think I'll start with genre, but I want to move beyond that. So a lot of the book is about returning to this Bildungsroman, to the Bildungsroman, and reworking it from a place of like personal political transformation. I think transformation is a really important concept in this book. But you're also thinking, that's happening on all sorts of registers, but it's also happening at the level of genre adaptation. This is not related at all
to what they're talking about. Please keep it relevant.
So you already a little bit answered this question for me, thinking about your own archive, but I'd really love to hear you speak to what genre you think this is, and like, what was it like to arrive at that? What drew you into writing comedy? I have written about comedy. I tried to make that sometimes funny, but this is like, you are writing comedy. And I think that's like very noteworthy about this project. In addition to the things that you're bringing in about kind of moving from academic publishing into a much more public, your work I already really think is very public facing, but moving to Haymarket and these type of things. So what that correlation between your genre and maybe this emergent audience for you is. And then I think one of the biggest strengths of the book is how it's forcing this encounter with work as a joke, which Jason's already spoken to in, quite eloquently. And I think this was definitely, what I was trying not to laugh at the Graeber excerpt. That's a hilarious book, right? That he's staging this joke for his readers. So I'd love to hear just any thoughts you have about what that means, like the question of how to radicalize fake workers, right? I think you have a huge insight into that at, the political work of the joke specifically. So just any revelations that you might have had through the process of writing this about what it means to joke about work, what we're doing exactly when we're joking about work. I've thought a lot about this tension in joking about work, where, you know, obviously we joke about work to cope with work. There's like tons of like managerial discourse about how to like infuse comedy into your workplace to increase productivity and like instill a sense of like purpose and aspiration in your workers, right? But it's also clearly a way that we grasp at this reality, which we're kind of, it's in some ways really painful to really confront, which is that we're what are we doing with our time? Like, what am I doing with, what is my job fake, right? Of course, like there's the case of, you know, somebody who doesn't think a philosophy professor should have their job thinking that that's fake work, right? But
a philosophy professor isn't fake work.
We have these moments, and they're almost these kind of dark secrets, right? Like of this sense of knowing that work is a joke and that we're participating in it. And so, yeah, I was just wondering if you could speak about that language of comedy and that as a like theoretical framework, but also, yeah, an approach to writing and your genre. I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I just want to at first like toss it back to Lee Claire and any responses that you want to have to what these folks have had or what I've said.
So many. I mean, oh my gosh, thank you guys so much. I mean, I have so much to say too. Honestly, every point that that each of you made. And maybe I'll just start with something that Sarah said about you know, you going in, Sarah, as a sort of detective. You know, what is it like to work at McDonald's? And that's a genre of writing about work that doesn't work, right? I mean, because one of the things that is so powerful about work is its production of a certain subjectivity and its production of an inability to be aware of that subjectivity while it's happening. It's not experienced as such. And so when you're going in on your own accord, going in for certain things, knowing you're leaving on your own accord, there to, you know, get your angle, get your interviews, I think it's very hard to access in any more than a sort of really documentarian fashion. And I mean that kind of pejoratively, a sort of socialist realist fashion, like what it is that people do.
I just asked, is writing books considered work in the chat? We'll see how this goes.
You know, I think that the thing about this project is it has at its root, it has at its foundation, the serendipity in my life that I really did want to be a businessman. I mean, I could, if I had decided I want to, you know, I'm going to go to find out what it's like so that I can go write about it. No, it would not have produced, I think, the affective and subjective archive, which I think is really required to motivate a narrative. It's not required to motivate an ethnography. It's not required to motivate a questionnaire response, but it is required, I think, to motivate the narrative. And, you know, I think we could, it's funny. I think I grew up, my parents were both academics. So for me, going and working in business was itself a kind of post-teenage rebellion. Like, who leaves Hampshire College and goes to be a businessman? You know, like,
true.
I think the book is also, I hope, I mean, people didn't talk about this. Maybe it's one of the things we can't talk about. Very queer. I mean, someone asked, I think it was you, Madeline, about what is the genre. I think I'm trying to remember my phrasing, but I think at the end of the book, I say, a queer auto-theoretical anti-work memoir, something like that, which I think is the closest that I could come. I think it's, all of those things a little bit. But it's funny when I tell people, even now when I say, oh, I wanted to be a businessman, they think I'm like a bad second wave feminist who's using man to mean human. They're like, oh, you mean businesswoman? And I was like, no, I wanted to be a businessman.
Patriarchy.
And that was such a surreal, subjective element in that space that it didn't even register. I mean, there was no space for a fantasy like that to register. There was no space for inquiry to register. I mean, that's not an allowance of that space. And one of the things, we can talk about the particular sort of characters that I introduce in the book, my colleagues and who they were and what they did. But some of them were more cynical, some of them were, more sort of partisan, but I mean, they were believers, right? And so to Jason's question, like, how do you organize this? They were believers, and the difference in organizing a job that's hard, a job that is not well compensated, and a job like this is, this was an amazing job. I mean, what did I do? I got paid very handsomely to fly all over the world business class and hang out at nice hotels. I mean, it's surreal. So, but what couldn't be penetrated in that space is they could not see that those were actually spoils for an absurd system. They don't have that subjective allowance, right? So for them, the subjective allowance is very much one of meritocracy and capability. And they felt that they were, do what
do you not have to have meritocracy to write a book?
There's an interesting story. One of the characters that I introduce in the book, who I became very good friends with while I was working this job. Her name was Lainey Magdalena. She went by Lainey. And I published last year an excerpt of this book in N+1 magazine, and they said before they ran it that they would like to talk to some of my colleagues from the job, and I was like, okay, wow, like these are management consultants who I haven't spoken to in 25 years. Like, what are they going to say when an editor from N+1 calls them to do this sort of like basic fact checking? So one of them I got back in touch with, the one who I'd been very close to, and I said, I'm publishing this book and you're a big character in it.
Philip, engaging in the chat.
And
this is like a banner day.
I'd like to send it to you. And I said, I hope you will see that my writing for you is there's a fondness there that, I wouldn't have spent this time thinking about you and your voice if I didn't have a fondness. And I mean, this was like dropping an anvil into somebody's car. I mean, there was no ability to talk from the point of that book to somebody who had been in management consulting for 25 years. And I think she felt, in a little bit, in a sense, taken aback that this experience had stayed with me in a way that it hadn't with her. So my point is that, I think to me, that's one of the weaknesses of Graeber's critique is I mean, I like the book. I like the essay. I teach it quite often. I love his tone. I love his style, but there is a whole sort of affective and subjective transformation of people at work that I don't think he can attend to with his categories. And he certainly can't attend to moving from one category to another. One of the things he says also about, bullshit jobs, the person has to think it's bullshit. I mean, that's one thing that I think is already a big hurdle. But for him, working these jobs produces a kind of nihilism and a kind of resentment of the possibility to have meaning in one's life. And this is where I think that this book, Fake Work, really differs from Graeber, because this experience was deeply meaningful for me in really some of like the most profound of ways, right? I mean, it produced in me a politics, not a politics of resentment, and not a politics of sort of, I think, almost a kind of nihilism that I think comes out of that Bullshit Jobs book, but really a politics of like knowledge and transformation and hope. So I think that's, one difference. I do want to say, in terms of Madeline, some of your comments, I first of all, thank you for saying that this is a comedy. The genesis of this book, the genesis of the book the first time is to record this surreal environment and try to make meaning of my life as a 23-year-old. But the genesis of it the second time is, and I think you and I have corresponded about this, but I really long for a sort of vernacular and quotidian Marxism. Like I would love to be able to read a Marxist sports newspaper. Like, I enjoy reading about sports. I wish there were a Marxist sports newspaper. I would love to be, there is, okay, maybe you can tell us about it. I would love to go to a Marxist comedy club. Like, I would love to have Marxist stand-up comedy. So at one point in my life, I think maybe I could have done a stand-up comedy bit. That point has long since passed. So I started thinking, like, I wonder if this has material to do Marxist comedy with. That's how I sort of went back to the book. But I can't do it I don't have the affective presence to hold a space in a room in a way that a stand-up comic can. But I did write this book to be a contribution to a sort of vernacular comedic Marxism. And we'll see if it registers like that or not. I'm glad it did with you, and I love your
Can someone go over to their chat that's not me and ask very politely, what is the role of unions in the workplace? What is the role of unions in the workplace? I only need one person to do this, and I need it to be done very, very politely. So if there's more than one person going over there, just please make sure that no one else has done this before you chat in, because if two people do it, that could ruin it, okay? So just one person.
It's not just off.
What is the role of unions in the workplace?
Definitely office humor, and it's not just a bullshit job, but there's certainly elements of bullshit. But I really am trying to maintain a sort of connection to some of the political economic questions about value in labor and work that have motivated so much of 20th century critical theory. I'll leave it to the panelists to decide whether that,
the link in the
happened
chat
or not, but that was the aim, definitely.
Don't abuse this, please.
I should say, if people are watching this online and want to submit comments, you can do that on the YouTube page. The folks there will feed them to me, and I will ask them, because we've got about 30 minutes or so left. But I have some questions, and one of them, which jumps off some of what we were just talking about, is like, so you had, all things considered, a relatively harmless management consulting job. A lot of management consultants are out there recommending, let's not even talk about Pete Buttigieg, but flying around the world telling companies to fire half their staff to reduce their stock price.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just sort of a question of like this job being fake, but like in some ways, like you stumbled into like the nicest end of management consulting, which was just documenting, whatever is happening with Y2K. And you could have ended up, a 22-year-old telling people to fire their 55-year-old employees who are never going to find another job.
Mm-hmm.
Never going to find another
job.
job.
I think is an interesting, again, sort of accident of your experience. Like you landed on the fakest end rather than the like, the class enemy end, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want me to respond to that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that is I think it's interesting. I think that there are only so many ways to make money, and if you're paying the management consultants what they're getting charged, somebody else has got to go. So the management
That's
consultants
not
come
actually the way
in,
that works at all.
and I mean, I don't know what the figures are now, and who knows how much they would be in if we translate it. But this project that I present in the book, this Y2K project, I think like the price, it was like started out to be a $4 million project and ended up as a $7 million project. So you're right. No one got hurt. I mean, it was just the environment did from, all of the flying. But if you're going to bring in management consultants, they have to justify their fee, and their fees are astronomical. And there are just not that many ways to, make money. If you're a large corporation, one of them is your variable labor costs. That would be your workers. So you fire them. But I do think that this sort of, conversation that we're beginning to have opens up a larger discussion about what is the necessity in our moment of capital and capitalist accumulation to have this class of I really do. In the book, I describe management consultants as kind of organic intellectuals. Like, they're trying to make sense of the business world. They're trying to articulate it. They're trying to produce a vocabulary and a framework for understanding what it is that's happening. Now, what it is that's happening is sort of what's always been happening. Like, there's no new there. What's new is they're being paid to articulate and produce this discourse that then gets used in these different ways. I would say that maybe that is changing, that maybe that moment is changing. I think one of the interesting things about Trump and the Trump economy and Trumponomics is that you don't really have to justify yourself, right? You don't need to have the management consultant there saying, look, it's true, we're going to get rid of these workers, but we'll be streamlining this, and new jobs will come and new things will happen. You just have, I don't even know who you have, Elon Musk, who? I mean, I don't know, just somebody saying, we're just getting rid of it all. Just shut it. We don't need a discursive production to accompany these things that have always happened. We don't need a sort of self-reflexivity of capital at a certain moment. I think that's a lot of what management consultants do, right? True, they fire people. That's one of the ways they do it. I mean, they're also involved in all kind of, like corruption problems. They work with these different probably in our country too. Look at Arthur Andersen. I mean, they're doing the auditing for the two companies that end the dot-com boom, right? They're signing the notes, they're signing the audits. So they cause huge amounts of harm. But in addition to doing that, they do, I think, have an intellectual and discursive function. And that's what drew me to them, right? I thought oh, okay, I'm a philosopher. So I should probably be a management consultant. That makes sense. And it did, I guess, on a certain level. And they certainly understand themselves that way. That is their own self-understanding. So yes, in many ways, this was the most surreal job I could have stumbled into. In other ways, I just don't know. I mean, I think one of the things of getting more and more workers' inquiry of different moments in time, and particularly of the of sort of, people from the FIRE economy, what they're doing and how they're doing it, is that these stories emerge. I mean, and particularly in a moment of sort of now we're used to our economy being structured by an asset bubble. It comes in. There's a huge increase in value and valuation. All of these ridiculous jobs and companies are made possible. And then there's a crash. And then there's a consolidation. But this was sort of the first of those. In a way, I stumbled into a very special and especially unique and surreal moment. In another way, they were there for the taking. If you are white and middle class,
I know they're protesting at Dartmouth
from certain schools, that is the requirement to get in, you know?
Yeah. I don't know if Jason or Madeline want to jump in there at all, or no? All right. So I want to, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, I guess, ask a little bit more about earlier in speaking of the
I have
book,
no
you said
idea.
this is a book about
No
the
clue.
liberal
I don't
arts,
care
and I
either,
wondered if you
honestly.
could just directly speak to that. I was thinking a lot. Actually, the only time I met you was at a conference, the Rethinking Marx conference that became this great collection after Marx, edited by Colleen Lai and Christopher Nealon. I was just reading the introduction the other day, and there's this incredible section that, for me, historicized my experience in graduate school, which is a section called Reading Capital in the English department post 2008. And I was just really struck throughout reading your book about what was the experience specifically of becoming a graduate student in that time. I mean, I don't think it's imaginable for people in graduate school right now that it could be it could foster this transformation into becoming a Marxist, able to I know that students now are becoming Marxists and things like that, but it's a different kind of experience that you're speaking to.
Yeah, they are, aren't they?
You know, situated right before that moment in 2008, but processing this collapse in the late 90s. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit more to and also that contrast you're making between the education you might have had as a college student and like what actually happened once you had this life experience and work experience.
I mean, it's so funny because, you know, one of the, and again, I think this is changing, so people can correct me if they think I'm wrong, but for so long, one of the calling cards of the liberal arts have been, look, you don't get an education in, you don't get a trade education, obviously, but you don't get an education in business, you don't get an education in management, you get an education in these sort of movable abstractions that will really allow you to do anything. So you're just as good at the investment bank as the, you know, person who majored in business. Maybe even you're better because you have this ability to think conceptually that is really only fostered by the liberal arts. Now, again, this is a sort of narrative that the liberal arts tells about itself. I'm not subscribing to that, but I'm saying, right, I think that is their understanding of themselves and their uniqueness and their narrative. And, you know, one of the things that I do in the book, I was a philosophy major in college. So in Fake Work, you know, I was genuinely trying to understand my experience at this corporation in 1999 and 2000 by using the text that I had, which was like Plato or Hannah Arendt or Derrida or Lyotard or whomever, Habermas. And I was trying, you know, I was really trying to make something of them. And, you know, one of the things that I think is so interesting about my sort of experience of the liberal arts and its absorption of post-structuralism in the moment that I was there was like, no one ever told me this is a reaction to Marxism. Like, this is a critique of Marx. This didn't come from nowhere. Like, everything is a text. Like, everything might be something else. Everything might be a value. Everything might be a job. Everything might be labor. No, the whole world is a text. So now I don't hold my professors in college necessarily responsible for that, but I do think it's interesting that the radicality of the liberal arts doesn't include a political economic dimension. Or it didn't for me. Maybe it does now. Maybe that has changed. I mean, I don't know. I try to do that with my students, but I don't have that sense, and I certainly didn't have that sense then. And to come from a school like Hampshire, which is self-styled as a particularly radical approach to the liberal arts, to not have exposure to this. I mean, I mean, at a certain point, it is funny. I mean, that's what other word? It's ironic, right? Or it's funny, or it's symptomatic. And so I think one of the things I would also like this book to do is have people not only who are interested in the liberal arts getting that education, but teaching it, think about what the critique is in service of, and where someone goes after that, right? Where they are imagining going. And again, I think right now we're in such a sort of liminal and transitional situation that, you know, I don't know, what will the liberal arts look like after 4 more years of AI? I genuinely don't know, right? But for me, the liberal arts didn't offer what I needed to make sense of this moment. It did offer me, though, enough to say I'm not making sense of it and I should do something else to make sense of it, which itself is an education, right? Which itself is a sort of gift. And, you know, when I went to graduate school thinking I would write this book, the one that, you know, the Bildungsroman, that I would write fake work as a dissertation, a sort of global ethnography of corporate labor. Of course, I knew I needed a sturdier theoretical buttress to do that. I started reading Marx, and then I lost my voice. I lost the voice that had written the first book. And I think that's an interesting moment as a writer, right? To realize, okay, there is no going back to that voice in any way but an archival way. I mean, I think it's interesting that it took me so long to sort of figure out how to do it and what to do with it. And then to your question, Madeline, about like, well, how did you come up with this genre for this book? I mean, I'm really glad to have been able to work with Haymarket on it, because I talked to different presses and different editors, and what I was told time and time again is the management consultant stuff is great. The critique of management consulting is great. Take everything else out and just write a book about like how horrible management consulting is. Everyone can get on board with that. But that's not the archive that I had. I mean, that's sort of incidental to the archive that I did have. So it's an awkward book. It's a hybrid book where I am trying to work through an archive. I am trying to critique a certain kind of knowledge work. I'm also trying to critique liberal arts, and I'm also trying to have fun with Marx's oeuvre, and with, you know, theories of work and labor. Like, what would it mean to have fun with Marxism? What would it mean to have fun with critical theory? What would it mean to laugh with it? I mean, these are sort of investments I think that the book has.
I did want to say, because I reacted before and then forgot about it, that Dave Zirin has been holding down the Marxist sports writer beat for like 20 odd years, has a radio show and has a column at The Nation. And yeah, so there may not be a whole newspaper, but there is Dave doing his heroic work.
I would say, just not to get too in the weeds, I don't think he's doing Marxist sports criticism.
I mean, I guess we could argue about like whether I'm doing Marxist anything either, because I don't have a degree in it. But like, I think the same ways that we're doing journalism and we have to do, like, to do a vernacular thing, we have to do it in the vernacular. And I guess that's the challenge of trying to work in a world that is not academic at the moment, although for my sins I've applied for a PhD program, so maybe I'll be one of you next year. That we are working in a world where we can't assume that all of our readers know who these people are. And that is an attempt at doing the thing in public for a wider audience.
I read Dave's work. I really enjoy it. To me, it doesn't take, it's too focused on sort of individual stories, I think, to approach the sort of level of like systematicity of sports as culture. But I think he's great and I love reading the work. So yes, I should have said, I would say we have great socialist sports criticism, you know, but we don't need to, to finally debate that, I don't think.
Yeah. No, but the other thing I wanted to talk about, because you brought it up there a little bit, is the liberal arts question. I read the Financial Times in the morning. And the Financial Times is big on liberal arts grads right now. It thinks that that's who we're going to need to get through the AI, right? Because we're going to have critical thinking now. And that had got me thinking. The book that I had read right after I read yours was The AI Con by Alex Hanna and Emily Bender. And the point that they make about how AI doomers and AI boosters are the same people, reading that right after having been reading about Y2K and this idea that the tech is going to end the world, right? It is a very interesting sort of moment of, again, where history rhymes, right? And it made me think about what that had to do with the tech bubble. Right, that the tech was so important and so everywhere and so ingrained in our everyday lives that it could end everything. Has a lot to do with now this AI sense, or this idea that that the people who are telling us that the thing can end the world are actually the people who are trying to sell it to us.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's funny that it goes back a little bit to, I think, Madeline's question about periodization. And in retrospect, the funny thing about Y2K is here you have this fake crisis that is predicted to end everything. It ends nothing. And then a bunch of different crises do actually happen, right? So I think, if the mid to late 90s are sort of this boring, anxious moment of consumerism and world peace, not really, obviously, but there's no more Soviet Union. The political scandal is Bill Clinton having sex with an unpaid intern. I mean, it's so adolescent in so many ways in retrospect. And then there's the psychoanalytic reading of a society that's telling itself everything is great, except for there's this one thing that could destroy it all. And that's what we have to focus on. And then that's the wrong thing, right? And then what they're worried about does happen. Does it happen again with AI? I don't know. Such an interesting question. We could do a whole other panel on AI and critiques of labor, and critiques of work and what it's doing and what it's doing to the liberal arts. And I think that you're right to say, and it wasn't just the Financial Times, there was another article this past week that was humanities grads have, what is it, the most earnings or the best job placement? It was one of these. I mean, it was one of these articles. What is that a discourse actually of? I don't know. Is that a discourse of pedigree? Is it a discourse of elitism? Is it a discourse of abstraction? Is it a discourse about education? I really don't know. I think it's an interesting question. I think it's we'll have to stay tuned for that one.
I want to bring Jason and Madeline in again, because I feel like I've just been asking you questions. But also I want to talk about Jennifer, because I found Jennifer so fascinating. Madeline's giving me thumbs up, and you said you wanted to talk about Jennifer. So maybe I will just open that door and be like, what do you want to say about Jennifer? And then we can go back to Lee Claire with it.
Oh, I just want to hear, what is it? I understand how Jennifer might have reemerged, but what's your story of sitting with Jennifer as a kind of archetype or something like this over these decades? And with her, there's so much about the heteronormativity and misogyny just baked into workplaces, which I think the last 10 years have been just great at blowing open, whether we're resolving that or not. But I'm wondering kind of at what point did you start gaining these insights that are just really lovely?
So the book is it's first person, obviously it's told from my perspective, but I work with these different consultants during the course of the book. Sort of there's one in each. The book is divided into 3 sections. And I found all of them really intriguing, even in the moment, because they lived these lives that I couldn't live in 100 years. I mean, the first I think that you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think the book now reads from the position of 2025, sort of how Mad Men seemed when we were watching it in like 2010, right? Where like the manager comes in and like, compliments the secretary's like hair and then says like, hey, sweetie, get me a drink. I mean, we were just we weren't quite on that level, but there was a tier of all male managers, and then right below them were the all sort of female analysts. And then there were a few, 2 women who were sort of the exceptions, who were vested with enough power to be able to move between the all male managerial cadre and the all female analyst workforce, but only on the condition that they were exceptional, right? No one could go for that job. You could only have 2 jobs, and they had them. And so the first one was a woman who I call Cindy, who is just, she was referred to as a den mother because she just took care of everything and took care of everyone. And, I think probably had decided when she was 3.5 years old that she wanted to be a management consultant, and her whole life she worked for it, and she got it, and she did it well. And I had a very deep appreciation for her own sort of like politics of self-respectability, I guess, and sort of self-mastery. And I don't think there was anything cynical about her. And when the whole sort of house of cards came tumbling down in 2002, and Arthur Andersen was revealed to be as big of a fraud as what, Donald Trump? I don't even know what the right analogy would be at this point. I thought about her, like that must have been like an actual spiritual loss for that woman. So she was the first person I worked with, and I take a lot of time in the book to sort of like try to understand her and to try to understand like, what do I find so interesting about this type of character? But then I got transferred on.
Okay, this is a little boring. So let me just give you guys a breaking news update from Twitter. James Lindsay tweeted an hour ago, woke generally holds that no natural hierarchies are legitimate. True. Woke does believe there are no hierarchies, okay, that are natural. Woke left runs with this by trying to obliterate all hierarchies, which is called radical egalitarianism. Well, it's called the abolition of capitalism, actually, but okay, good enough. So now James has said woke doesn't believe there's any hierarchies. The woke left want to eliminate all hierarchies. We're almost there. And then he says the woke right runs with this by trying to enforce rigid, artificial hierarchies of their own making. So his argument is that the woke right is exactly like the woke left because the woke right wants hierarchies, but the left doesn't. We're so close. We're this close. We're this fucking close. That close. All right, enough of a break. Let's go back
to that book. I should really rewrite that book. I would check on my colleagues. I would sort of find them online. Like, what are they doing? And all of them were doing exactly what you would expect them to be doing. They were all like working in consulting or strategy or this or that. But I just could never find Jennifer, which just seemed so odd. At the same time, like, her company, Arthur Andersen, really did like absolutely explode, and maybe she just couldn't get another job. And then I realized while writing the book, like I just found some of my notes and I realized, oh, you know what? I think that she probably she was maybe either using her maiden name. I realized could use a different last name. And then I found this archive. She has become a total entrepreneur of the self, in the sense that she runs a podcast and a site for women to be even more entrepreneurial than they might already be if given the proper coaching. And she's very, because now this is her business to be forthcoming with herself. So it was a sort of wonderful experience to find her archive and match it with my archive. Like here, I went to become on like an English professor who writes about Marx and 1980s literature and art and the labor market. And she went on to become somebody who like runs her own channel of self-promotion about how incredible female entrepreneurs are. And it actually, it allowed me to have a new sympathy for her, which is what I think I needed to write the book. Like, I think that, one of the things that I think that leftists or people on the left or liberals like maybe don't appreciate enough, or I know I didn't appreciate enough, is like when you write about fascists or capitalists or Nazis or whomever, like that's who's in your head. That's who you're spending time with. That's who you're in conversation with. And I'm glad that I found a new angle to have a conversation with Jennifer about after the fact, because just her managing her golf club and her home renovations were just, it was wearing thin. It was really wearing thin, but finding this like new archive where she's so self-disclosing. And again, like I have this fantasy about like, I would love to like send her the book, but I think she would just be like, oh my God, she was a homosexual. Like, I don't even, I think that would be what she had to say about it,
Suspected homosexual.
Suspected
what made me laugh. Yeah. So we want to wind up in a minute here, and I just kind of want to
any
give
of our
everybody an
questions,
opportunity
Sarah.
to come back in and
we've asked questions,
leave us
Philip.
with some end of the whatever thoughts.
We have
thought
asked questions that
Jennifer
Philip
became
didn't
an influencer.
ask.
Influencers are the management consultants of the internet.
Lame.
It made perfect sense to me. But yeah, Jason, we haven't let you speak in a while. So you want to start off? Take us out, and then we'll
He's the
let Claire
man.
close
He's
us
not
off.
allowed to speak.
Yeah. So Claire, I'm very struck by what's come in this conversation. On the one hand, this idea of management consultants being the organic intellectuals of capital. But as you said, and this is more in our discussion than in the book, like maybe their moment is fading. Maybe capital doesn't need them anymore. And I mean, it's a lot going on there. I mean, because I feel like, we intellectuals kind of exist as a surplus produced in the source of in the search for the organic intellectuals of capital, right? In the university. And I also think there's something there about why, the question you raised about why liberal arts doesn't have a critical political economic component. To me, it's sort of this compromise between like, oh, we'll produce your management consultants and we'll produce intellectuals, but the two things shall never meet in this place in between where you talk about capital. But then, so that's a transformation that I'm very interested in your thoughts about that. But the other transformation that I think you're calling for, which I think is really important and really worth talking about, especially here, is your idea of a vernacular Marxism. I do think that one of the challenges up and coming is we may need to figure out, it's already sort of happening, of a way to continue these kinds of conversations without the infrastructure of the university as it has existed, because I don't think it's continuing to exist in the same way. So, I mean, all that, I mean, I guess it's not, I think, accidental that a book that's very attentive to transformations of knowledge would produce this conversation where we're talking about what is the transformation of knowledge right now. And I realize I'm kind of off the page with the book, but I do think that what you said there is like bears repeating and bears. I'm going to be thinking about it for a while after this, at least.
Madeline?
Yeah, I think I want to speak to the same possibility, which I also, Jason, I really admire your work for doing this same kind of thinking outside of the institution.
Not fair. They ruined
There's a lot
everything.
of talk about making things accessible in popular facing writing, which I'm thinking actually about. I've been thinking a lot about this conversation I had with the late, great Joshua Clover about everything that's wrong with that.
Joshua Clover.
Because most of the time that results in a kind of talking down, which reinstantiates all of these problems that we don't need to get into, especially at the end of this conversation. And I think that that's really, Jason, I see you doing that with film criticism quite beautifully. And I think, LeClaire, your project, I think it speaks to me as somebody who really cares about anti-work comedy as a political project, that it has that capacity, that it isn't about talking down or talking up, right? But it's about kind of breaking these boundaries. And I appreciate what you said, that it's an awkward book, but like comedy is awkward, and that's actually a lovely thing. And that it is about kind of bumping against these expectations and taking you down surprising routes of thought and inquiry. And so it's more of a comment, but I just want to say that I really see that happening in this book, and I want more of that. I fully agree that we just need to find ways to infuse these political problems into as many different kinds of writing as possible. And if that means inventing your own genre, like, so be it. That's awesome. But maybe that's what you're doing. I kind of like the idea that that's an unanswered question. I see that moment in your book where you're like, if I have to define it, this is what I'm going to say. But I don't think we need to necessarily have a name for this genre. It's just, yeah, it's a gesture that I think we should follow. So, thank you. Thank you all. This is a really fun conversation too.
Yeah, Lee Claire, wrap us up.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm just so happy to be in conversation with all of you. And, you know, I think that, yeah, one of the real tensions of the book, you know, what Sarah said, the vernacular is vernacular and the abstract is abstract. And, you know, what is the space to sort of negotiate this? So I'm so pleased that my, you know, efforts, as modest as they are, seem to have landed on my audience of 3 here. And again, I just want to thank you guys for reading it and for your thoughts.
Of course,
because it'll
we
also
blocked you, Reagan.
this conversation will
I'll
stay
look at
with me
that.
for a
Thank
long
you.
time. And for anybody listening, you know, either on Red May or YouTube, share your thoughts. I would love to hear them. When a section of the book was published in N+1, and Twitter was still Twitter, I think, a lot of management consultant people who had left it wrote back like, that's really what it is. Like, that's what you do. You fly around the world with spreadsheets. So let's keep the vernacular going. Let's broaden the conversation. Let's see what comes next. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Well, thank you,
boring
everybody.
talk.
And I hear that I am supposed to wrap up, that Philip is not going to come back in and give us a plug. So all of the events that I wish I was in Seattle for sound really lovely. And thank you once again to Red May for putting us all together to talk about work and why it sucks. And yeah, if you haven't watched more of these videos, there's a bunch more. They're great. Red May is wonderful. Can't wait till next year. Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right. That talk was really boring, and you know, that just sometimes happens. There was, I mean, I guess a couple of things that we got in there, but like, I really wish they talked more about unions. I wanted them to talk more about the role of unions in the workplace, and they didn't do that. It was just kind of like a weird talk. It was like, I worked as a management consultant, which, by the way, she wasn't a management consultant. She was like a low-level IT person is what she was. I worked as a management consultant when I was 22, and I really didn't like my job. And therefore, all work is fake, except that work they approve of is okay. It's like, it's this most convoluted thing. I just want to spend all my time thinking about economics and finance. No, you don't. No, you don't. You literally don't. Like, and that's okay, by the way. You don't have to like. I worked in corporate America for a long ass time. I was a consultant. I didn't work in one of these big consulting companies because I would never do that, but I was an independent consultant. And it, like, there are elements of it that kind of suck, but you do make a lot of money for advising people on things. But like, if you don't like that job, go get another job. It's like, we live in a time when you can create your own jobs, you can create your own positions, you can create your own businesses almost for free, pretty much for free. It's like, you can use free and low cost tools. You can use AI. You can, I mean, there's so many business models of Like, you can do whatever you want, or you can try to carve out a role within an organization to help them use all these tools. I mean, it's just like, why would you spend time? Like, can you imagine this person 20 years ago had a job she didn't like and has been thinking about that job that she didn't like for 20 years until she finally wrote a book about that job she didn't like? I just, dang. Anyway. So kind of a lackluster episode today, guys. You know, they can't all be bangers. We never quite know, especially when we're doing Socialism Live. We never quite know. But this was a little bit more of a boring presentation. I was like zoning in and out. I could not even focus because I'm kind of over everything. I'm honest about it. I'm having one of those weeks where I'm just like over everything, where I'm like, everyone is stupid and everyone sucks. And you know, the left, at least, the left are coming around. The left are coming around and they're having intellectual conversations. The left is like, you know, even as much as that conversation sucked, you have to give it to them, because the left is getting together and they're having these kind of just like intellectual discussions, and they're talking about ideas and they're exchanging ideas. And, you know, you might think that their conversations are a little bit obsessive, and that's fine, well and good. But they're getting together and they're having like really meaty conversations where they're breaking down ideas and talking about things and planning things and thinking about, what does this mean for the world? These are intellectual discussions. The right is running around calling everyone fat and ugly. And that's what we have on, quote unquote, our side, is a bunch of unhinged retards running around saying, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're ugly, you're fat, you're a whore, you're a fat, you're a whore, you're fat. Like, that's what we have on our side right now. You're too fat to be on the internet. You're too fat. You're too fat. You're too fat. Why don't you lose weight? Why don't you shut up, fatty? You're too fat. You're too fat. You're too... And they think that this is going to beat the left. It's just like, you know what, bro? Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. But that's what the right wants. That's all the right wants, is you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat, you're fat. It's like, fault the left all you want for being crazy and having nutty ideas, because that's true enough. But at least the left sits around and has intellectual discussions that can involve a little bit more thought than you're fat, 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 you're fat. It's like, shut up. Anyway. That's kind of like my thought for the moment. I'm sure that whole thing will get clipped out of context and used against me, whatever, because that's all they know how to do. That's all they know how to do. So we're not having a great morale day today. But that's all right, because I'm going to get off the internet now, and I'm going to go write some stuff. And I'm going to go be productive, and I'm going to go have complex discussions with myself in my head, because I can't have them with anyone else on the internet. And well, that's not true. I do have a wonderful community, and I appreciate the smart people in my community that show up and that don't behave like unhinged retards, and that know there is more to the world than what the numbers say on the scale on any given day. And you know what? I'm gonna go do? Because it's hot as fuck out. I'm gonna go get some. I'm gonna get some ice cream. I'm going to feed my copious fat ass by going and eating some ice cream and making myself feel better. And then I'm going to do some writing. And that's what we're going to do today, guys. I will be back tomorrow. I will be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern time. And I promise you that after my ice cream, I'll be in a much better mood than I am today. And yo, I wish I could go swimming. I wish I had like a watering hole near me or something. That would actually be amazing. That would be amazing. Anyway, guys, I will be back tomorrow and we'll do it all over again. Thank you guys for hanging out. I appreciate you. We'll see you soon. Bye.
How are you feeling? How long have you been here?
3 months, May 17th.
And what brought you?
That's difficult to answer.
To give you some idea.
I am not completely like other people.
What do you mean by that?
People dislike me because I am not completely like them. I am trying to do with my life something which few people try to do, and this influences my thinking and consequently my action.
What is it you're trying to do with your life?
Play the piano for people.
I'm not clear. How is it that playing the piano for people has eventually resulted in your being here in the hospital?
That's difficult to answer.